Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for those kind words. It's been a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity of serving with Mark and working with a person who truly believes, as his father, in bipartisanship and working together. And I am proud of some of the work that we have done. Skip Rutherford, Skip, I thank you for your stewardship of this magnificent institution. Thank you for your continued service, and thank you for the guided tour today. And I'm glad that Mark did not mention that I lost running for President of the United States. And thank you for, after I lost, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry, sleep. And I'd like to ask your sympathy for the families of the state of Arizona, because we've had a series. Barry Goldwater from Arizona ran for President of the United States, and a guy named Morris Udall from Arizona ran for President of the United States. Bruce Babbitt from Arizona ran for President of the United States. I, from Arizona, ran for President of the United States. Arizona may be the only state in America where mothers don't tell their children that someday they can grow up and be President of the United States. So I ask for your sympathy. My friend Tom Cotton is here. I've traveled with Tom. I appreciate his wonderful service in the military, serving our country, and obviously he's one of the bright and upcoming stars in our House of Representatives. And thank you, Tom, for being here tonight. And Davy Carter. Davy, your reward will be in heaven, not here on earth. I want to assure you, as the first speaker in all of these many years, and we're proud of your leadership as well. So it's an honor to be here and talk with you about the privilege and purpose of public service. In gratitude for the opportunity, I'll keep my remarks brief so that I can have ample time for your questions and comments. I'm more interested in hearing your thoughts on that subject. I'm afraid my own reflections can become just another trip down nostalgia lane, a journey people of my age like to make with dull regularity. I'll begin by stating the obvious. Service to a country founded on the ideal that all people are born with the right to liberty and equal justice under the law is the most personally rewarding occupation I can imagine. Admittedly, I have no other occupation to compare it to. I've been employed by the American people my entire adult life, but I can't think of another life that could be more satisfying. You can make a lot of mistakes over the course of more than a 50-year career, and I'm sure there have been days when the public might have wondered if they were getting their money's worth from me. No doubt I've been an imperfect public servant, but there's one thing I can claim with all sincerity. There's never been a day in my life, in good times and bad, when I wasn't grateful for the privilege and when I didn't understand that America has given me more than I could ever give her. I think the most important thing for any public servant to understand is that no matter how prestigious or obscure your office, or for how long or briefly you serve, or how much recognition you receive or don't receive, you'll end your service more indebted for the privilege than entitled to the reward. You'll have already received the greatest reward any of us can ever earn: your self-respect. In America, our rights come before our duties. We're a free people, and among those freedoms is the liberty to sacrifice or not for our birthright. But those who claim their liberty and not their duty to the civilization that ensures it live in a half-life, having indulged their self-interest at the cost of their self-respect. The richest men or women, the most successful and celebrated of our citizens, possesses nothing more important if their lives have no greater object than themselves. They may be masters of their fate, but what a poor destiny it is that claims no higher cause than wealth or fame. Should we claim our rights and leave to others our duty to the nation that protects them, whatever we gain for ourselves will be of little lasting value. It'll build no monuments to virtue, claim no place in the memory of posterity, offer no worthy summons to others. Success, wealth, celebrity, gained and kept for private interest is a small thing. It makes us comfortable, eases the material hardships our children will bear, purchases a fleeting regard for our lives, but not the self-respect that in the end matters most. But sacrifice for a cause greater than self-interest, and you invest your lives with the goodness and eminence of that cause, your self-respect assured. It doesn't matter whether your service is to your neighborhood and community or whether you serve in national office. The reward is the same if you do it for the right reasons. Make your neighborhood better, your town better, your country better, the world better, and it'll make you better. We all have flaws. We all sin. We can improve ourselves, but we can't fundamentally change our nature. We can only hope to use the best in our nature to do more good than the worst in our nature has done harm. That might seem to be a meager aspiration, but it's not. It's a great and demanding ambition. When your time has passed, you might be remembered as much for your failures as your successes. But if you failed in service to worthy and difficult causes, your regrets won't burden you more than you can bear. It's the hard-earned things, whether they were failures or triumphs, which matter more to your self-respect than easy successes. I don't want to take up too much of your time giving advice you probably don't need. We're brought here today by a school for public service named for a man who devoted most of his life to the public good. I'm sure you already appreciate the value of serving a good cause. Neither do I want to succumb to the temptation to indulge in a reverie for a career that is much nearer its end than its beginning. I'm sure I'll have ample opportunity to give in to that temptation when I'm retired and boring the hell out of my family and friends. So I think I'll impose on you just one story from my time in public life because it involves President Clinton and marks the beginning of my appreciation for him, not just as a very gifted politician, which he surely is. If I had his gifts, I might have a different job today. But as a dedicated public servant who risked his own interests to advance our country's. I'm proud of our country's history. We're not a perfect country. We've made mistakes, but what we've achieved in our brief history is irrefutable. Proof that a nation conceived in liberty will prove stronger than any nation ordered to exalt the few at the expense of the many, or made from a common race or culture, or to preserve traditions that have no greater attribute than longevity. But as great as we are, as blessed as we are, as empowered by liberty as we are, no nation complacent in its greatness can long sustain it. I think the best public servants understand that and spend their public life trying to improve on the past rather than relive it, and helping make possible another, better world. We can learn from history. We can take pride in it, but not as our own accomplishment. Every generation has to make its own history to do that. I served in the Vietnam War. I have more good memories of the experience than bad ones, but I've never wanted to relive it. I learned from it just as the country learned from it. And while I can't quite forget it, I always wanted to move on from it. And I don't think a person can find much happiness as a captive to their past. And I don't think countries can either. About 20 or so years ago, it seemed to some of us Americans that we had been fighting the war about Vietnam long enough. And the time had come to begin a relationship with our former adversary that served shared interests rather than perpetuate old grievances. So we began advocating for the normalization of relations with Vietnam. At that time, we didn't have diplomatic or commercial relations with the country. We still enforced a trade embargo with Vietnam. We only dealt with the Vietnamese on a single issue, an important one, accounting for Americans who are still listed as missing in action or as prisoners of war. Beginning with President Reagan's administration, continuing through the Bush administration, and into President Clinton's first term, the Vietnamese had been improving their cooperation with us on POW MIA questions, and we had reached the point where we were finally putting the issue to rest. It was time to move on. That was a relatively easy position for me to take. There were people opposed to it, of course, and some people who resented me for taking it. Some veterans of the war, although not a majority of them, disagreed. A majority, but not all of my fellow Senate Republicans did as well. But because I was a veteran, I knew I wasn't taking much of a political risk by advocating for normal relations. It was hard to accuse me of bad faith, and I felt pretty safe from criticism. I think it was the right thing to do, and I'm proud that I did it. But it didn't require any political courage on my part. That was not the case for President Clinton. He wasn't a veteran and wasn't protected from criticism as I was. He had to risk his self-interest to do the right thing. He had to have courage, and he did. Obviously, only the president can normalize and conduct relations with other countries. If President Clinton had put his political interests before the country's interests, the problem would have been left for another president to solve. But he didn't do that. He did the right thing, and the right thing is often the hard thing. We had made an informal agreement with Vietnam if they began helping on POWs and MIAs get out of Cambodia and released former South Vietnam officials from re-education camps, we would begin discussing normalization. When they hit certain benchmarks on POW MIA accounting, we would lift the trade embargo. When we were assured that accounting would continue until all the questions that could be answered would be answered, we would establish diplomatic relations, including the exchange of ambassadors. At every stage of that process, President Clinton kept his word and did the hard but right thing. I know quite a few of his advisors weren't eager to take on the issue and cautioned him against it. He got a fair amount of heat for it from some veterans and more than a few Republicans. I don't think it helped his re-election prospects, but he had the satisfaction of knowing that he helped two countries, ours and our former enemy, move beyond our tragic past and build a better future that served the interests of both our people. Today, old grievances are replaced by new hopes. Increasing numbers of Americans visit Vietnam every year, including 3 U.S. presidents, drawn to the country's spectacular natural beauty and friendly people. Bilateral trade is more than 80 times greater than it was in 1994 when the U.S. lifted its trade embargo. This has benefited the people of both countries and enabled millions of Vietnamese to lift themselves out of poverty. Our defense relationship has evolved to an extent that was simply unimaginable even a decade ago. Our militaries exercise together, and Cam Ranh Bay is again a port of call for the U.S. Navy. Indeed, the USS John McCain, a Navy destroyer named for my father and grandfather, recently made a port visit in Da Nang, which shows if you live long enough, anything is possible. Our country's had a difficult and heartbreaking past, but we didn't bind ourselves to the past, and we are now traveling the road from reconciliation to friendship. This promising prospect is among the most satisfying surprises of my life, and one that I expect will astonish me further in the years ahead. It's also one of the proudest accomplishments of my public service. I hope President Clinton is proud of it too. He's earned the right to be, and I thank him for his leadership. He served a cause greater than his self-interest, and that's all there is to know about the privilege and purpose of public service. Thank you very much.
All right, question and answer time. Please raise your hand and then wait for the phone to get to you. We have a question in the back, Bob. Right back here, yes.
Thank you. It's an honor for you being here. My question is Benghazi, Fast and Furious, and Kuwait, unarmed weapons and ammo. As a country, where do you see us headed as far as getting on the right path, being on the right path, and in a country that can lead to the right path?
Well, I thank you for that question because, as you know, there's debate raging in Washington about, and in the country, about the role of the United States of America. Americans are war-weary. I understand that, and I think everyone here does. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we sacrificed our most precious American blood, and neither one have turned out certainly as we had hoped or expected. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is America's role in the world? And I would argue that the United States must lead. That doesn't mean we get into wars, that doesn't mean we get put boots on the ground, but I think Syria is a classic example of a failure of American leadership. My friends, there's 80,000 people have been massacred. There's over 1 million people who have been displaced. Lebanon and Jordan are destabilized very badly. As we have sat by and watched, jihadists and al-Qaeda fighters have poured into that country, and the most unspeakable things are being carried out by Bashar Assad. Meanwhile, the Russians are flooding arms into the country. The Iranians are on the ground and also supplying arms, and these people desperately need our help. And again, what we should do and should have done a long time ago is to establish a safe zone, which we could do very easily. There's Patriot missiles across the border in Turkey, and also supply them with the weapons that they need with which to defend themselves. And every day that goes by while Bashar Assad remains in power, the more complicated and incredibly difficult the post-war. We all agree that he's going to leave at some point. We just don't know when. And the complications afterwards, the jihadists, the breakup of society, the caches of chemical weapons that he has, that Bashar has in Syria, which are sizable numbers, which if spread into the wrong hands could cause, as you can imagine, enormous carnage in that part of the world. The Middle East is terribly unsettled now, and I won't hop around from country to country, but us standing by and watching this take place reminds me, frankly, of back in the 1990s when there was a place called Bosnia, and President Clinton was reluctant to engage. And then we heard of a massacre called Srebrenica, where 8,000 people were, quote, ethnically cleansed. And President Clinton, to his great credit, intervened with American force, and we basically stopped the carnage there. And then again in Kosovo. President Clinton has said his biggest mistake was not intervening in Rwanda. I understand President Clinton's sympathy, his feelings there, but to this day I'm not exactly sure how we could have effectively intervened in Rwanda. But still, a genocide took place there. So our values are our interests are our values. And what I mean by that, our values are to stop things that are going on that are terrible throughout the world if we can. And that's a big if. We can't solve every problem. We can't intervene everywhere. But where our values are involved, to sit by and watch what's happening in Syria is very serious. And I'm giving finally a long answer, but let me also tell you the consequences of our failure are going to be long-lasting. I was in a refugee camp filled with people, about 50,000 people living in very terrible conditions. We met with the leaders of this camp, and they were very angry and bitter at us for not helping them. And there was a woman there, was a school teacher, and she said, you see these children? There's children everywhere in this camp. She said, see these children? They're going to take revenge on those people who refuse to help them. So we are breeding a generation of people who are angry and bitter at us for not helping them. And that is going to be a very heavy price to pay. And I promise all my other answers will be very short. Thank you for the question.
Question. Yes.
Right, yeah, back there.
I'm nervous. My question concerns a domestic issue, Medicare. In talking to people that I know here that are on Medicare, I am finding that, yes, the doctors will see them, but they are not taking new patients. And that is myself, who has worked and will be going into Medicare, I am deeply concerned when my time comes, will I get good medical care? Thank you.
Well, thank you. It is a benefit that you have earned. And our job is to preserve it. And yes, there are more and more doctors who are refusing to take Medicare patients because, which is their right, because they are not reimbursed sufficiently, in their words, in order to, they're not in the business of losing money. And it's going to, the problem is going to loom larger and larger. But let me just say, the bigger problem is with Medicare itself. There's not a question in anybody's mind that Medicare is going broke. There is debate over when, but there's no doubt that it is on an unsustainable path. I was pleased to see the President's budget have some very small but initial reforms that need to be made in Social Security and in some cases on health care as well. That has got to lay the groundwork for coming together of both sides, where we are going to have to agree that we will have some revenues, and I think we could do it by closing a lot of loopholes, and at the same time we have put us on a path to reform of both Medicare and Social Security. They are not sustainable, and I believe that it'll be there for you, ma'am, and I believe you're going to be okay, and I believe there's going to be enough doctors probably who take Medicare payments. But I'll tell you, my kids, it's not going to be there for them unless we do something about it to fix it. And finally, one of my fond memories was in 1983, Social Security was literally on the verge of bankruptcy. The checks were going to stop. And Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, the old liberal from Massachusetts, and Ronald Reagan, two old Irishmen that got together, who used to like to have drinks together and tell Irish jokes, and they walked out together in the Rose Garden and said, we're going to save Social Security, and they did for 25 years, 30 years, and they did it by raising taxes, and they did it by raising the age for eligibility, and they made tough decisions, but because they were together, it worked. And so that makes, then I have to tell my favorite Irish joke to you. There's a bar in Boston, and there's one guy down at either end of the bar. The bar is deserted. The guy walks down the other end, and he says to the guy, where are you from? He says, I'm from Ireland. He says, hey, really? I'm from Ireland too. Let me buy you a drink. The guy says, yeah, let me buy you a drink. Buying each other drinks back and forth. He said, where are you from in Ireland? He says, I'm from Galway. He said, I'm from Galway too. Wow, let me buy it back and forth, buying each other drinks, slapping each other on the back. And the guy said, where'd you go to high school? He said, I went to St. Mary's. He said, you couldn't have. I went to St. Mary's. Really? Guy walks in the bar, sees all the commotion down at the other end of the bar, and says to the bartender, what's going on down there? The bartender said, it's just the O'Reilly twins getting drunk again.
That's a good one. That's a good one. On a national level.
And by the way, the only ethnic joke that can be told in American politics is Irish jokes, as you know.
That's good on a national level because you have Reagan and O'Neill dealing with Social Security. We have a little version of that going on in Arkansas right now. We have Beebe and Carter dealing with Medicaid. So we have our own version of that. All right, let's have a question. Let's see, we have a question right back here. Yes, sir.
As a child the threat of nuclear war with Cuban missiles aimed at Arkansas at our Titan II silos. And with rogue nations now about to arm themselves, about to deliver, or have the ability to deliver those weapons, what do we do to reduce the risk?
You asked most important challenges of the 21st century, and that is the proliferation of technology which can lead to many nations having a nuclear capability. And perhaps the erosion of the nuclear umbrella that we assured nations both in the Middle East and in Asia that we would protect them and that they didn't have to develop nuclear weapons by themselves. You read the newspapers and watch television as I do. As far as Korea is concerned, we've seen this movie before. Confrontation, negotiation, aid to Korea, North Korea. We've given them food, we've given them money, we've given them oil, and that satisfies them for a while. Then they go through confrontation, then we have negotiations. It keeps a lot of diplomats employed, but it has been a total failure, a cycle, Republican and Democrat. The Bush administration dropped sanctions against North Korea, freed up a bank account. They had hundreds of millions of dollars they'd gotten through drug trade and other illicit means on the prospect that we would somehow persuade the North Koreans to get rid of their nuclear weapons. They will never do that. The North Koreans would be totally irrelevant on the world stage unless they had nuclear weapons. And by the way, they have a 200,000 person gulag where people are routinely beaten to death, tortured, and kept in slavery, the likes of which is nowhere else on earth is that like that. Now, as far as Iran is concerned, the centrifuges are spinning. Here's the question. The question is, do the Iranians think that we are serious about acting with the Israelis if they reach a certain point where it is for sure they either are at the verge of or capable of nuclear weapons? Now, North Korea is a threat, and China is the culprit here because they can change North Koreans' behavior. But Iran, the threat of Iran is not that the Iranians would put a weapon on a missile and launch it. The threat is that they give a weapon to Hezbollah, who is a stateless terrorist organization, and there are many of them. And then what do we do if a nuclear weapon goes off on the Lebanese-Israeli border? And so that's the real danger, is this proliferation of these weapons. And finally, if you're sitting in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia today and you see the Iranians, their blood enemies, moving forward with nuclear weapons, aren't you sooner or later maybe going to make a decision as to whether you should develop those weapons as well? And that's the same with other countries. It is I think, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and I already mentioned the chemical weapons that Bashar has, is probably one of the great challenges of the 21st century. And as a footnote to that, it's so much easier to develop that technology than it was some years ago.
Got a question right over here. Phone too.
Thank you, Senator McCain. My name is Chuck P. of Little Rock. I just want to address, I saw Speaker Justice Stevens, retired Justice Stevens from the Supreme Court, spoke here last year concerning just one topic, the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission case. I know you've been outspoken about that. How do you feel like the role of campaign finance reform is in America? There's current legislation. I'm part of a group, I believe, trying to support the initiative that you put into place in 2002. How do you feel like the role of that is coming forth? There is current legislation. How do you feel about that?
I respect the United States Supreme Court, but the decision they made is one of the worst in the history of the United States Supreme Court. Because to treat a corporation as a citizen flies in the face of everything that I have ever known. That's why we have special laws for corporations and that don't apply to citizens. But Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was the swing vote in this and upheld the so-called McCain-Feingold bill. And then when she left, there's not, let me just mention one anecdote. When Lyndon Johnson was vice president, Jack Kennedy became president, he appointed all of these best and brightest to his cabinet, people like McNamara and Rusk and all of these people, and they were the whiz kids and all this. And a guy came to a reporter, said to Lyndon Johnson, he said, what do you think of all these incredible people that Kennedy has appointed to his cabinet? And Lyndon Johnson said, I just wish one of them had run for county sheriff. I just wish one of these 9 had run for county sheriff. I just wish they understood the realities of what is happening in American politics today. We are awash in money from unknown places. And I guarantee you, when you got that much money washing around, there's going to be scandals. There's going to be scandals. There has to be. There's too much money. And some of it may come from foreign countries. Some of it may come from, I don't know how it's going to all evolve. But I know this, that when you've got this much money washing around, without knowing where that money came from, we are in a very, very serious situation. And look, it's bipartisan. It's being done by Republicans with these various organizations that are supposed to be not for political purposes, but on the other hand, look at the organization the president and his people just set up. An ongoing campaign. It's an ongoing campaign. They're taking money right now. And so there's going to have to be scandal, but I will continue to work to try and, in fact, I've been having conversations with Sheldon Whitehouse and with Harry Reid about trying to develop at least transparency. At least the American people deserve the right to know where the money came from. And so we're going to try to
Welcome here in Arkansas, Senator John McCain. My name is Fabrice Janku. I have 2 questions for you. It's about U.S. foreign policy on Africa. The first question, pretty quick. When you see past events in past U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia, and the most recent, the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi, and the immediate consequence, which is the acceleration of instability in northern Mali, many Africans and African scholars here in the United States and abroad are concerned that the militarization or the US militarization of Africa will further destabilize the continent. So what will you say to alleviate the concern? That's the first question. Second question, pretty quick, is when we compare the China engagement or the Brazilian, Indian engagement dealing with Africa, when we compare that with US emphasis on democracy and sustainable development, many Africans believe that this approach is dissuade. And like a leading Senegalese even say yesterday, a couple of weeks ago in the French radio, that this approach is quite, you would say, mediocre. So how do you think that the US should engage its African partner going forward? Thank you.
Well, Al-Qaeda is spreading all over North Africa and headed south. There's no doubt about it. And unfortunately, because these countries do not have the ability to secure their borders, among other things, these people are moving back and forth. Jihadists are pouring into Syria, as you know. I just came from Mali a little over a week ago. The French did a great job. The French came in there and prevented the capital of Mali from falling to jihadists, and they killed a lot of them. But they didn't kill all of them, and a lot of them melted into the mountains and melted into the population. The French are not going to stay forever. And as the French withdraw, the question is there any kind of force to make sure that those people don't reconstitute themselves and cause a greater threat? And the answer so far is there is not. But the whole North Africa situation in Libya, those arms caches that we didn't go in and protect, unfortunately. There's so many weapons washing around that it's amazing. And I'm not talking about just AK-47s. I'm talking about RPGs. I'm talking about really heavy weapons. And a lot of them are flowing into Syria as we speak. These countries, let me just say, first of all, I would remind you that it was not more than 2.5 years ago that there was a young man in Tunisia that had been mistreated by the police, and he tried to sell fruit, and he'd been humiliated in front of his friends. And so he poured gasoline on himself and set himself on fire. That fire is spreading not just in Africa, Egypt, Yemen, Tunisia, Libya, Syria, but it's also spreading around the world. And it's going to spread to places like China and even Russia. Because in this day and age, I haven't got it on me, the BlackBerry, my friends, there's ways now of communicating and organizing in ways that were unheard of. It's the greatest advance since the invention of the printing press. So all I can say is that the good news is that these people are rising up and asserting their God-given rights. The bad news is that unless we assist and unless they go in the right direction and their economies are the key to it, then these revolutions, not for the first time, remember Iran, not for the first time can be hijacked by radical Islamic extremists. And that's why, another argument in my view, why the United States has to remain engaged, but not with troops on the ground. I hope that responded to some of your questions.
Okay, let's see, we have a question right back here in the middle. Yes.
Hi. I was just going to say that in America today we have a take everything and give nothing attitude, and I was just going to ask what you would recommend we do in our communities to make people wake up to see that we have to give back and serve, as you talked about for so long.
I think that there's a great deal of selfishness in America, but I'll tell you, when I go out and see so many people that are doing so much in our communities, including the quality of young men and women, not only who are serving in the military, that it's the best ever in the military. It's the best we've ever had. Now, that's all being threatened by this sequestration, but they're the best. When I see these young people who teach for America, who are willing to go into the inner cities and teach, or at the Indian reservations and spend time there. When I meet these young people who are in AmeriCorps, who are in Peace Corps, I see a level, frankly, of volunteerism that exceeds that of my generation. And I'm very happy about that. I think we have a generation of young Americans who are more willing to serve than that in the past. And our job, I think, as a government is to try to find ways, both state, local, and federal government, to find ways that they can serve.
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you for having Mr. McCain. I'm Ayman Al-Shami. I'm originally from Syria, American Syrian, live in Little Rock. You are a great man. Thank you for your help and support for the Syrian people and helping the people to get their freedom. And you are a great man with a great vision, and I really appreciate that. And everything you said is great. What do you think? Is there any way we can? Is there anything we can do to help change the position of our government here to help the Syrian people and the Free Syrian Army to be able to defend themselves? I'm not talking about food or, I'm talking about really arm them, let them help themselves and get their country back. I just talked to my brother in Syria, in Homs, and he asked me to tell you, please, if any help, they are getting the missiles and the bombarding with tanks and artillery on daily basis, every day. And they are living in fear with their family. He has 5 children, he cannot leave. He said, I don't want to be a refugee, I'm gonna die here. So is there anything, is there anything we can do to change the position of our administration? Or you suggest anything, or you see any point that the administration will help the Free Syrian Army, especially against also those jihadists, which the Syrian people don't want them. Nobody invited them. They came to help, few, and they are not many, but they don't want them. They want the real help. They want to get their freedom in their country. They don't want jihadists in their country. Thank you, sir.
Family will be in our prayers. It's interesting that we know now, thanks to reporting, that every member of the national security team of the President of the United States, that's our Secretary of State, then Secretary Clinton, our Secretary of Defense, then Panetta, the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, the head of our National Intelligence, General Clapper, every one of them recommended giving arms to the freedom fighters in Syria. Every one of them. They were overruled at the White House. They were overruled. Now we announced yesterday we're going to get them flak jackets. I'm sure that that's a great comfort to these fighters while the Scud missiles are exploding. And it's just shameful. It's just shameful. I'm not here to bash the President of the United States. I'm working with the President of the United States on immigration reform, on a grand bargain, on a number of things. But this is one of the most shameful chapters in the history of our country. My friends, I've been to 2 refugee camps. I'll never forget, and I probably shouldn't even mention it because it makes me choke up. I met a group of young women who had been gang raped. Now, that is one of Bashar Assad's strategies. Now, we can't sit by and watch that happen. I'd also like to point out one other aspect of this. Our head of our Central Command, General Mattis, one of our great leaders, has testified before Congress, as have others, that the fall of Bashar Assad will be the greatest blow to Iran in 25 years. So it's not just a humanitarian situation here, it's also a national security issue. And I start out my conversation, I understand Americans are war weary. I'm not asking to put boots on the ground. But why can't we help these people in what is clearly an unfair fight? And so all I can tell you is that I will not quit, I will not give up. More and more Americans are of the belief that we are, but I think you also know that the longer this goes on, the more difficult it's going to be to sort out this mess once he goes. With all these jihadists in there, the chemical weapons caches, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with them, these competing groups for power, and I have to tell you, the best fighters on the ground, the jihadists. Many of them fought in Iraq. Others have fought in Libya, and they're not afraid to die. And so these people are gaining more and more traction, and obviously we don't want to see Syria turn into another Iran. I thank you, tell your family that our thoughts and prayers are with him, and we won't quit.
Yes, we
Somebody wait for the microphone.
Hello, Senator. My name is John Garahan, and I'm from Cabot, Arkansas, which is actually Davy Carter's district. Hi. I think
How old are you?
I'm 16, sir.
All right, he'll worry about you in a couple of years.
I think you'd be pleased to know that I'm about to start the process to get into the Naval Academy.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I think I could speak to Senator Carter later. I'd like to enter politics later in my life, and I guess my question is, after nearly 32 years in Congress, are you more or less idealistic than when you entered the House in, I think, 1982?
Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. It's never been asked of me. I'm serious, and I think it's something that I should contemplate. I hope that I am more idealistic, but also more realistic, recognizing that if you really want to achieve something in this day and age in the Congress of the United States, you really got to work hard. You can't do it by yourself, and you can't quit. And sometimes it takes a long, long time, and sometimes you are bitterly disappointed, as I was about the Citizens United decision of the United States Supreme Court. But my main emotion is that I am grateful. I am so grateful for having had the opportunities that I have had to serve the people of Arizona. I am the most fortunate person, no matter how long you live, you will have ever talked to with the experiences that I have had in my life. Thank you.
We got a lot of questions. We got time for one more, and I'm gonna ask you. 2 more questions, all right? If somebody can have, we'll get one to ask one. Right here, yes ma'am, we'll let you ask a question, and then I got one to ask you, then this guy at the student session, you know, he just went on and on and on and on. You know, really good.
Several fell asleep.
That's not true.
Hello, my name is Lakissa, and I'm gonna try not to be nervous. But here lately, I've been reading the paper about the Social Security and the Medicare. So I was like, okay, she said it was like a tape situation. If they cut back on Social Security and Medicare, are they gonna cut back like on when we get paid? They say they take out $126 out of federal. Are they gonna cut back on that as well? Because it seems like the rich is not pouring back into the system. So I'm just trying to figure out what's gonna happen to us. Is they gonna stop taking from out our paychecks?
Well, in the words of Chairman Mao, it's always darkest before it's totally black. There always has to be adjustments made. When Social Security first came into being in the 1930s, the average age, I think, was 62. Isn't that right, Mark? Something like that. Now the average age is well into the 70s. Thank God. Thank God it is. But we're going to have to adjust for that. People are working longer as well as living longer. And so it was never envisioned when we created Social Security that there would be more going out than coming in. That in those days they thought it would be balanced out and would last forever. It's not. And the deal that Reagan and O'Neill made was an increase in taxes, pay more, increase in the retirement age. We're going to have to retire at a later time. And so it's pretty obvious to me that we're going to have to make adjustments. Now, when the economy of Greece fell, do you know what the first casualty was? Their entitlement programs. They stopped. All their Social Security, all their medical programs died because the country went bankrupt. Now, I'm not saying that America is going to go bankrupt, but if we're going to preserve these very important programs, and they are earned benefits, they're not giveaways, they're earned benefits, we are going to have to make adjustments as compared to the realities. And also, my friends, unlike what happened when it was predicted, the cost of health care continues to go up at an unacceptable level. And we've got to get the cost of health care to a reasonable level of inflation. Otherwise, no matter what changes we make in Medicare, it's not going to be there. And with all the electronic advantages and technology advantages we've made that are incredible, why is it that we haven't been able to translate that technology into better, more efficient, less expensive health care? You know, when you went to a doctor, you used to have to carry around a big folder with you that had your health records on it if you went from one doctor to another specialist. Now it's all on a computer, or should be. There are so many things that technology has given us to advance the cause of good and better medicine that we should be saving us money rather than costing us additional money. But we need all of us, whether we be the Speaker of the House or whether we be a Democrat or Republican, we've got to talk straight to the American people and explain that we can't sustain the path we're on. And if we appeal to the American people to make certain choices, then I think they will respond in the affirmative. But that's what leadership is supposed to be about.
One question I want to ask you this one. You talked about working with presidents. You talked about working with President Reagan, President Clinton, and others.
in Arkansas, there's a lot of speculation, as you might imagine, for the 2016 election. You served with her in the United States Senate. You worked with her. You traveled with her. You worked with her as Secretary of State. Would you talk about former Senator, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and what you see?
First, could I tell a brief anecdote about Thatcher? Margaret Thatcher, the story goes, when she became Prime Minister of England, she had an all-male cabinet. All of her secretaries of various agencies were all male. She took them out to dinner with her, and they all came to dinner, and they sat down in this restaurant, and the waiter came over and said, "What would you like to order?" And she said, "I'd like to order the beef." And he said, "Well, what about the vegetables?" And she said, "They can order for themselves." Anyway, I don't know if that's true or not, but she did during the Balkans, though, did say to President Bush, one, "Don't go wobbly, George." I know you know that is a true story. I think that Secretary Clinton has done a fine job as Secretary of State. She has represented the United States. She's an international rock star. I think that to project the image of America around the world, she has done a tremendous job. I wish she had been more involved in the Syria issue. She did recommend, as we now know from published reports, arming the Syrian resistance. I wish she had been a little more vigorous on that. But when you look at a person to travel the world and to try to help resolve the various issues that exist between the United States and these countries, you have to give Secretary of State Clinton extremely high marks. And she worked very, very, very hard. She kept an incredibly grueling schedule. Now, I'm just not sure I want her husband back in the White House. That's the question. If I had to predict, I guess it was Yogi Berra said, never try to predict, especially when you're talking about the future. But I would say that all things being equal, that she would be an extremely formidable candidate for President of the United States, and she understands the national security issues that are facing this country in the 21st century. And I enjoyed traveling with her, and I enjoyed spending time with Secretary Clinton. And
we've enjoyed spending time with you. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator John McCain.